30 franchises and they grew to over 3,000. So pretty impressive. But I heard Howard on Ed's show. And what I thought was so neat was at the end, which is very rare, is that Howard actually shared his personal email and phone number. And so Jim Johnson, the aggressive person, said, well, I got to meet this guy. So I ended up, first of all, I ordered his book, which I want to show. It's called It's Not About the Coffee. And I read it, and it just added how impressed I was with Howard's work. So I actually emailed him and said that I was going to recommend his book to my network, and I'd love to connect. And later that day, I was sitting downstairs in my man cave, and my cell phone rang, and it was Howard Behar. And we had a nice little chat, and he was so gracious to have us or be a guest on our podcast. So we're really excited to have you, Howard. So first of all, welcome. I know you're out in Palm Springs, so you're a little bit warmer weather than we are in Rochester, New York. But thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. So Howard, we're going to start. I'll start with the first question. Then we kind of go around the room, and we'll ask you a number of questions and try to use your time as wisely as we can. So I know when you took over as part of the executive team at Starbucks, I know one of the things was really big for you was servant leadership, which the three of us are also feel it's very important. So I have a twofold question. First part is, how would you define servant leadership? And secondly, why do you think it's so important to be an effective leader?
Well, in its basest form or simplest form, it's that leaders are here to serve versus being served. That leaders' primary responsibility is to help their people grow as human beings and as professionals, and then help them achieve the goals that they want in their lives. And by doing that, then their people want to help the leader achieve his or her goals, and help the organization achieve what they're trying to do. So it turns it on its head. It turns leadership on its head, because most people think, boy, I can hardly wait till I can be a leader, and then I can tell people what to do, and they have to serve me. It's the opposite of that. And when you do it well, then the organization blossoms, it grows, it succeeds, and it moves forward. There's no guarantee of success because you're a servant leader. It doesn't mean that you're going to be rich or anything, but it's a way of living, and it makes for a much more productive and happy organization. I mean, servant leadership is, also about performance, that it's not just about giving, but it's also about producing. And at the end of the day, they go together. They're not either or. And so I'm a true believer in it. I've seen it work a number of times, and I've seen the other side of that coin, autocratic leadership, that didn't work over a long period of time. So, that's what I brought to Starbucks. When I started, there were 28 stores, and when I retired, there were 15,000. So something must have been going right. And now there's 35,000.
Right. And this is such an important point, the servant leadership, which so many organizations are not following. In our religion, our prophet said that one who is the servant of people becomes the master of them. So somehow that influence, when you care about others, the company cares for you, the people cares for you too. So I wanted to ask you one question, like this culture of care. How do you instill this within your company, this culture of care? And I have seen it. I don't know whether you know it or not. In Bangladesh, we have a North End coffee cafe, which is now growing like anything. And when I walked in first there, I saw that it was a Starbucks culture. You don't need to leave. You may not even buy a coffee, but you can be there. You smell the roasted coffee. Right. And later when I dug, I found out that the owner, he's an American, Rick Hubbard, and he was one of the store manager of Starbucks. So he went to Bangladesh, and now there's this huge chain of Starbucks culture in Bangladesh with a different name. So how do you inspire this kind of culture? And he talks about care, like community and people. People's come first. One cup, one experience, one customer. So could you just give us a story or your point of view of how do you instill these kind of culture within your company?
Well, first you have to live it as a leader. It's not this is not some manipulative practice. This is who you are as a human being. And so that's the beginning of it. Because if you don't do that, then it's not real and it's not authentic, and people smell that out. So it is a direct reflection of the leaders of the organization. It can't be anything but. And so not what the leaders say, but what they do is what makes a difference. And then you have to make it known. This is what you're doing and why you're doing it, and this is who you are. These are your goals, these are your values, and this is how you want the organization to be led. And then you have to teach people how to do it, and you have to reward and recognize servant leadership. And people that can't get on board with serving others, they don't really belong at Starbucks. They need to be at another organization. It doesn't make them bad people. It's just that they're not right for Starbucks. And so, that's how it works. It has to be support. It has to be explained. It has to be reinforced. Leaders have to live it, and it has to be rewarded and recognized, and taught and teach people how to do it and what it means. And when you do that and you're constantly reinforce it, it really was the be all end all at Starbucks. I used to always say that we weren't in the people business, weren't in the coffee business serving people. We were in the people business serving coffee. And it sounds like a small play on words, but it was a driving force inside of Starbucks.
Yeah, and
Mr.
you
Behar.
mentioned, I was just wanted to mention that you talked about in one of the interviews about a poster. You tore the poster, like you cannot teach these writing through putting a poster in your office.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there was a poster that said, "Be nice, be fast, be clean." And I ripped it off the wall. I said, "How about a poster that says, be human?"
Right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. We're talking with Howard Behar, who is, well, an extraordinary man, the author of a great book that you really should check out. It's Not About the Coffee, which Coach showed us earlier. Howard, I'm really curious because you've gone from, you said 28 stores to 15,000. So I got my math brain going, and that's about a 50,000% increase, which is sure something. But besides the raw number of that, the raw magnitude of that incredible growth that you had, what was the most rewarding thing besides that you had on your journey at Starbucks?
Yeah, actually, the number of stores is not what I hang my hat on. It never was. It after you open a couple hundred stores, it's a store. But what I love were the people of Starbucks, the people that I met, the people that worked in the stores. And so, what I'm most proud of are the people that worked at Starbucks. They gained skills at Starbucks. Then they left Starbucks and they went either into their own businesses, led their own organization, or became a leader of another organization, and they took servant leadership with them. And to watch people, succeed by using servant leadership in another place, another organization, really made me proud. There was a book called Living, Loving, and Learning by a man named Leo Viscalia. You're probably all too young to remember that book, but maybe you, Coach. But Leo Viscalia talked about wanting to be a master bridge builder. And what he meant by that is that he would help his people gently cross the bridge and then gently break the bridge behind them. In other words, he helped them grow, be all they could be, and then get out of their way. Encourage them to do more. And that's really what it's all about. So if you ask me what made me most proud, and it still does, it's the people of Starbucks that either are still there doing great things or the ones that have left and done great things, using servant leadership as their model.
Wonderful. Well, Howard, I know in growing an organization like you guys did at Starbucks is that building trust, I think, is really, really important. Can you share some ideas on how you were able to build trust amongst the troops?
Well, trust is everything. Trust, it makes the world go around. Without trust, there's nothing happens. If you don't have trust in a marriage, you don't have a marriage. If you don't have trust in a company, you don't have a company. If you don't have trust in a country, you don't have a country, right? You have dysfunction, right? In all those areas. So, you build trust by being honest, by not hiding. When something is wrong, you admit it. When you've done something wrong, you own it. You build trust by being vulnerable, by when you're fearful of something or when you're concerned about something, by talking about it in a positive way. You build trust by giving people trust. I've learned over living as long as I have that you give trust before you get trust. You know, you don't wait for people to trust you before you trust them. You trust them first. And if they do something that, you know, it doesn't reinforce the trust, then you have a conversation. But for the most part, you know, you got to give trust before you get trust. And you do it, like I said, by being honest, by being open, by not hiding, by, by listening, being a great listener, not only with your ears and your eyes, but also with those little antennae that you can't see that stick in your head. And so trust is the grease of life.
Right. And Starbucks always talked about how profit is, people are more important than profit.
Yeah.
And you always instill this, you and Howard Schultz instill this in your culture. I was wondering that this was so interesting when in 2007 or 2008, you closed all the stores all over the world because you wanted to train the baristas.
Yeah.
And that is courage. Not many organizations will choose this kind of strategy, but you lost billions. So how do you get that courage to make that decision to even embrace loss over people?
Well, you do the right thing.
Do the right thing.
And the right thing at that particular time, business was going down, and Schultz was kind of, I don't agree with him, actually, at that time. He thought that the problem was that some business was going down because somehow we were lacking in our operations. We didn't realize at the time that we were having a severe economic downturn, and that was causing the real primary issue. But be that as it may, whatever he believed doesn't make any difference. What he did was he took an action that he thought would help the company get back on track. And so that's what he does, and that's what he did, and that's what we did. You do the things that you think are necessary. You don't worry about the short-term profit, right? And we've decided to do that, and we did the same thing again a few years ago when we had an issue with diversity in our company. We closed the stores for a day and had developed education and development programs. So, I think it's not either or. It's profit and taking care of your people.
Right.
It's profit and caring. And so you do the right thing and it takes care of itself.
Yeah, but the young people now I talk to, many of them, not all, to them, it's like they're into business or some kind of project because of money. Okay, I want to be a doctor because I want to earn a lot of money. So, but often I tell them that if you are doing it only for money, then you might not always be doing the right thing. So, so what is your take on it? Do you go into the business or anything with keeping that money, generating money and profit being the primary or core goal? Or is it more than that?
No, your purpose is greater than yourself. Right. And the self is about money. They're not, like I said, it's not opposite of each other. It's not caring about people or making money. It's caring about people and making money. Right. And, I feel bad for young people that think that the whole thing is about making money, because you may make it, you may not make it. Is your whole life based on that?
Right. Right.
I mean, I understand, people wanting to have things and wanting to be rich. I don't have any problem with that. That was never a driving force inside of me. I always knew I could make a living and put food on the table and a roof over my, a shelter over my family, but it wasn't the driving force. And I didn't go to Starbucks to make money. Starbucks was losing money at the time. We had no idea it would become what it's become. I went there because I was trying to get out of corporate life. I wanted to do something that I thought had meaning. And I felt that Starbucks was a place for me to do that. And it turned out to be that place, and we made money.
Right.
Now, so, there's nothing wrong with having goals.
Right. You wanted to leave corporate.
Yeah, but it shouldn't be, it's not the only goals. Our first guiding principle was that we treated each other with respect and dignity. The last guiding principle was that we recognize that profitability is essential to our future growth and success. So yeah, they go together, but if you have to give up something, you're going to give up money for your people.
True.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's really powerful. Thank you for sharing that, especially for young and emerging leaders. Now, speaking of younger leaders, would you be willing to share maybe a mistake that you made early on in your leadership journey that you learned from, and then what would you say about that mistake moving forward, and how did that drive you to become the better leader after you made it?
So how much time do you have?
You know what? As much time as you have.
We could have 2 episodes.
Yeah, I mean, you make mistakes all along that journey. Most of the mistakes I made that I regret are about people, where I didn't treat somebody with respect and dignity. I'll give you an example. When I was a very young leader, I was in my late 20s, and I had a young woman that reported to me. And one day she came in my office and she sat across the table from me and she started crying. And I immediately got up and took the tissue and went around the table and put my arm around her. Said, "Don't worry, it'll be okay." She about ripped my head off, because she wasn't sad, she was mad. And it was her way of expressing anger. And I demeaned her by doing that. Mm-hmm. And it was such a valuable lesson that I learned. Don't judge tears or emotion, right, before you ask the question. How are you feeling? Why are you feeling the way you feel? What can I do to support you? Find out first before you go take an action, because you don't know. A man might come in and be screaming and yelling, and he might not be angry. He might be sad.
Yeah, I think that
it's
ties
his way
into
of expressing emotion. So most mistakes I made around how I treated somebody, maybe, I hired somebody that I shouldn't have. I fired somebody that I shouldn't have, that I fired somebody too early, but it was always that. I mean, I made lots of mistakes on the business side, products that I supported that didn't work, a service that I thought might work that didn't work. So, that's an endless journey. If you're not making mistakes, you're not growing.
Right.
But the people stuff, always the stuff I regretted most, where I might get angry about something. I'm an emotional guy, and I might get angry about something, and I let my emotion get away with me, and I did damage to a relationship that I had. That was always the issue. And I'd like to tell you that I'm perfect at that today. I'm not. I'm still an emotional guy, but I think I manage it better today than I've ever done it. But at 77, I better be getting there, because I have a lot of time to correct that stuff.
Yeah, no, I think that goes back to also, as leaders, we often feel like we always have to have answers and we always have to interject and say something. But how important is it to that woman who is crying, to just listen to her and to ask her what's wrong before feeling like we have to interject with some answer?
Yeah, it's the same way at home. One of my favorite quotes is a 2-word quote: compassionate emptiness. Compassionate emptiness. And it means this, that full of compassion, but empty of solutions. And, my wife would come home after work, and she was an oncology social worker. So she was always working with people that were dying of cancer, or families that were dealing with that issue. And she'd want to, talk about it. And of course, I always wanted to go into solution mode. It's a typical male thing. We got to solve problems, and that's not what she wanted, was it? She wanted me to listen. It was the same way with my kids. And it wasn't, I got better at it as I grew, and as I got older, and realized that it wasn't about solutions. It was about listening.
I know, Howard, both that you have a lot of success in business, but you also have a lot of pride in your family.
Yes.
Tell us, because, our focus is to try to help young and emerging leaders. How did you, I know that word is kind of scary, because I'm not sure there's totally, you can ever do this, the famous word balance. But tell us a little bit of how you work things between, spending a lot of hours in business, as well as taking a lot of pride in and having a great family.
Well, I like the word integration better than balance. I think that you integrate your work life and your home life, family life, etc., and your social life together. That it's all one life. And I was gone a lot. By the time I got to Starbucks, my kids were pretty grown. And so when I'd go on long business trips, my wife was getting her PhD, so she didn't miss me at all. She was glad to gone, and my kids were already in high school, so they were kind of on their own. But I always talked to them about what I did, and I would take them on business trips. So when I was gone, they knew what I was doing, and that made it a lot easier on them because they could understand I wasn't just gone. I was doing something that supported them, and that also that I like to do. So it was more that way, and treating my kids with trust. When you go through your own life and you realize all the dumb things you do as a kid, right? And you start to remember those, you realize that we're not perfect. And so, I always call it loose tight, give them a lot of leverage on the reins, but every once in a while, hold on to them a little bit to let them know that you were there, and also talk about your values and what mattered. And, the goal wasn't to punish them. The goal was to educate them. And I wasn't trying to control their lives. And as they got older, we'd create trust in our home. So, they'd go out, they were in high school, they would go out and, I didn't always question where they're going. I might ask, what are you doing tonight? But I always reminded them there was a cup in the cabinet, and that cup had $100 in it with $20 bills, et cetera. Said, if you have to take a taxi home because you've done something that maybe you shouldn't have done, right? There's the money there. You'll never be asked about that money, and I'll refill it I'll always have it full. And when there's money missing, I didn't go say, well, what happened? I ignored it. And so trust, we got trust. Didn't mean those kids didn't make mistakes. They did. And we had to intervene a few times, but it made a difference.
And you're one of the areas that I was so interested when I heard it in the interviews, like choosing your broom. You talked a lot about that concept, and this resonated with me so much because in Bangladesh, when I'm giving some training in leadership, many people from the lower management or middle management, they complain that the higher management, even if we have a good idea, they do not want to incorporate it because it's the ego or arrogance, something that stops it, and they lose the motivation to get involved in the company.
Right.
So could you take us talk a little bit about that and that example, that story about Santa Monica, like a new flavor of coffee?
Yeah, sure. So the person who sweeps the floor should choose the broom is a saying that I created to get people to understand when you go out and you hire people, give them some room. Talk to them about what the goals are that they are responsible for, what the greater purpose of the organization is, and then let them go. And if they come back and say, hey, if they're in charge of sweeping the floor, and they come back and say they found a great broom on the internet that they'd like to try, let them try it. Who knows more about how to sweep a floor than the person that's doing it and what kind of broom to use? So, and that goes in all parts of the organization. So we had a district manager in Southern California. Her name was Dina Campion. And Dina was responsible for sales and for service and for her people in the Santa Monica region of Southern California. And she called me up one day and asked me to come visit. And she took me on a tour of our stores. I went to visit her, and then she took me on a tour of competitor stores. And she bought a drink for me that was in one of the competitor stores. And she said, we need a drink like this in our stores. And so Dina and her broom. She was responsible for growing the sales. So this idea of a new beverage was her idea of a new broom. So I said, okay, let me take it back to Seattle and I'll get a group together and we'll talk about it and get back to you. So I did that, and there wasn't support for it. And so I called her up and said, there's no support for it right now, but let's give it a few months and we'll come back after it. And so about a month later, she called me up and asked me to come down again. I said, Dina, what is it that you want? And she said, well, I'd like to show you something about that beverage we talked about. I said, Dina, you remember our conversation? Let's give it a month. She says, please come down. I said, well, I'm not going to make a special trip, but I have to be down in Southern California in a month. I'll stop by and meet you on this date and this time. And so I did, and I showed up at the store, and Dina asked me to go sit down at one of our little tables, and she brought me 3 little sample cups of this drink. And she said, try this. And I took a sip, and it was remarkably like that drink we saw in the competitor store. And I said, Dina, are you trying to get me fired? And she said, no, we've got to do this, Howard. Dina was like one of those little tiny dogs with the really sharp teeth that sink them into your calf. And no matter how much you try to shake them off, you can't. She was just persistent as hell. And so, there are always times in your leadership career or management career that you go against maybe what somebody had said because you think it's the right way to do it. And you might try something underneath the radar. Right. And so we did this underneath the radar. And I said, call me every night, because if it isn't working, we're going to get rid of it. So it turned out to be Dina's broom was Frappuccino. And she and her team created the drink, and she tried it and grew sales significantly in a short period of time. So we took it back to Seattle, and I invited Dean up, and we made sample cups, and there was still pushback against it, but we eventually got it through because of Howard Schultz's help, and it turned into a $4 billion business, wow. All because of Dina's idea. Now, I don't plead for anarchy. Not every idea that's going to come across your table can you do, right? But we had a way of having filters and doing things, and sometimes you just needed to make a bet. You just did, as long as you didn't do anything unethical, immoral, or illegal, and you don't poison anybody, you could try it. And so that's what we did, and it turned into be a winner. Now, most things you do are small, a new piece of software or something else that you might do. But you always got to listen to people. Don't roll your eyes and say, can't you see I'm busy? The purchasing department chooses the brooms, Right. Listen and acknowledge the input and say, I had on my office wall that made it easy for people. I had a big office wall about 20 feet long. 1/3 of the wall, or about 20% of the wall, were white cards, things we were doing already, things we'd committed to. Another portion of the wall were orange cards, things that we'd moved along that we were thinking about doing. And then another section of the wall were pink cards. These were just ideas. Anybody could come in and put a pink card up at any time.
Wow.
Didn't make any difference what it was about. We had sections, operations, products, et cetera, and they could put up at any time. And then about once every couple of weeks, we'd go over the wall. We'd look at everything on the wall, the things we're doing, and we'd check how we're doing, and we are making progress where we want to be. The orange, or do we have any further input on these things in the orange cards? And then the white cards are the pink cards are things we were working on, and then the orange cards. Is there anything here we want to push forward? So we're always looking for new ideas, and then we would have a filter that we'd put them through. And so, you got to listen to your people, because you never know where the idea is going to come from. Look at Post-it notes. Right. Came from a couple of guys. That's one of the great stories, right? Guys working on some kind of glue, and they figured out, now we can do this with it. The guy that invented Instagram worked at Google and thought about this idea, and they didn't want to do it, so he did it. So that's the way it is.
True.
Yeah. And with that comes
bosses aren't the only ones with ideas,
Right. Yeah. And you have an open door policy. It sounds like you facilitated that environment to welcome others in and provide those ideas. How important is having that open door policy and not shutting out other ideas just because of a perceived status that you have?
Well, an open door policy implies that people have to come to you. I always believed in going to them. They all have words management by walking around. Going to talk to people at their desk, going sitting down with them. How you doing? What are you working on? What do you like about Starbucks? What would you change about Starbucks? So, and up at any time they could come into my office, of course, but that's the easiest thing. The hardest thing is to make the rounds and get up out of your chair and, get your butt in motion and go and talk to people. And, that's what makes a difference.
Howard, you mentioned earlier on the importance of recognizing and praising people. Can you guys share a few ideas with our listeners of ways that you felt were effective in recognizing your people?
Well, Ken Blanchard wrote a book called The 1 Minute Manager. And it was one of my all-time favorite books because there were so many little quotes and things. And one of them was catch people doing things right versus catching them doing things wrong. So if you catch people doing things right, they want to repeat the feelings they get when you come up to them and say, thank you for doing that, don't they?
Right.
So that's the beginning of it. It's easy to catch people doing things wrong. catch them doing things right. Doesn't mean you don't coach when you need to, but right. But it's, hey, that was a great shot you took, right? And here's why it was a great shot, and then here's when you're coaching them, hey, this is one way you could have played that defense that might have been a little more productive for you, right? So that's what really works. And so then, I used to send birthday and anniversary cards to everybody in the company up until we had about 10,000 people. And I hand wrote every one of them.
Wow.
I didn't know all the people, but I would write a little note. Thank you. Thank Joe. Thanks for all your efforts. Or if I knew him, hey, Joe, say hi to Mary, your wife, for me, if I knew him, or their kid. And so that trying to make sure that they knew that they were a human being, that they weren't some kind of just cog in the wheel, that they were just there to be used. And, we had little things we did. We had, if we caught people doing things right, we would take a helium balloon, and tie it to their chair so everybody could see, and any way to recognize them and thank them. You can't do enough of it.
Right. And the care this is so much important. And you talked about wearing the hat.
Yeah.
So you as a leader was consistent throughout, like in your family, in your work, you are always wearing that hat of honesty. So could you just, for our speakers, give your take on that concept of wearing the hat? Why is it important?
Yeah. Well, when I say wear your own hat, wear your hat, I'm not talking about the hats that we wear that define, or that is the work that we do, the people that we are, father, mother, doctor, lawyer, whatever, son, daughter. I'm talking about the hat that we wear that defines who we are as a human being, that represents our values in life and the actions and decisions that we make based on those values. So you have to think in life about who you are as a human being. It's the single most important thing we can do if we want to be a great leader, is to really understand who we are as a human being and what matters and how we want to live our life. So you go online, you get a list of 300 words that represent human values. And the goal is to take it down to 8 to 10 core values. Doesn't mean there aren't 50 other words that might describe things that you are, way you do things, but these are the things that are absolutely core to your being, the things that matter most to you. My first core value is honesty. And I try to live an honest life. Do I tell white lies sometimes? Yes, I do. But I try to live my life honestly and creating trust between myself and others. And so that's what the hat that I'm talking about. The hat that you put on in the morning, when you look across the bed from you, if you've got to put on a spouse hat, you better evaluate the relationship you're in. If you go to work and you got to put on a Starbucks hat, you better evaluate where you're working. You should be able to wear your hat in all parts of your life because you are who you are.
Right. Definitely.
That's that word integration again, rather than
integrate.
Balance. It's integrate. And that's one thing that's really gotten you to where you are. And hey, also the importance of leading yourself too, because we all talk about how much, you've led thousands of franchises, right? But the first person you have to lead is yourself. How have you done that over the course of your career?
Yeah. Just as a correction, we didn't ever had franchises. We were almost all company owned. Okay. Stores. Somebody will be calling me for a franchise.
Yeah, no.
So, repeat the question, Esther. I forgot already.
So you led thousands of people.
Right.
How were you able to lead yourself in the midst of all of that? Because
you need to know who you are, right, as a person. Then you need to be looking at yourself all the time. How are you doing against your values? I had my a mission statement, different ones over time. My mission statement today is every day I want to nurture and inspire the human spirit, beginning with myself first and then for others. And then I have my 6 Ps. So the first P is everything I do in life that's a purpose greater than myself. The second P is if I have a purpose greater than myself, then I darn well better be passionate about it. Scream it from the highest mountaintops, put all my energy behind it. The third P is persistence. All in the rivers of all of our lives, there are rocks. Some of the rocks sit below the water. We can't see them. We hit them, we smack into them, and we get shocked. but we got to still get over them, around them, through them, underneath them, whatever. Some rocks sit above the water and we can see them and we hit them anyway. That's always the most interesting thing. Why did we hit that rock? We could see it coming. Somebody told us about it. We hit it anyway. And then there are the rocks that we put there ourselves, and all of us do that from time to time, but you got to get over them, around them, or through them, because persistence in life pays. The one common word that I would use that describes every entrepreneur is persistence. The fourth P is patience. You'd say that's the opposite of persistence, but it isn't. You have to be patiently persistent. Nothing comes in the time frame that you want it. Sometimes it does, but a lot of times it doesn't. So you have to be patient with yourself, be patient with others. Then the fifth P is performance. Performance matters in this world. If you make a commitment to have a monogamous relationship with your spouse, then that's a commitment you made. Performance matters. If you make a commitment to take out the garbage at home, performance matters. If you make a commitment to get something done, performance matters. And we don't like to be measured, but we're getting measured all the time. Our significant others or our spouses are measuring all the time. They may not be telling us, but they are measuring. And so you have to remember that performance does matter. And then the most important P is people. There's nothing you'll do in life that isn't about serving another human being. So all those things together, your mission statement, your values, go to create who you are. And I have it on a page I call a picture of Howard in 50 words or less. And I've had it for almost 50 years.
Wow, that's very cool.
And it's changed over time. But that's what drives me. So I look in the mirror every day and I say, Howard, how did you do? How did you do today against those things that matter in your life? And that's how you manage yourself. All of us have a board of directors that sits on our shoulders, talking to us all the time. They're yapping all the time, right? And one is telling you how great you are, and the other one is telling, hey, buddy, you better be humble. Then one of us might even say, hey, Howard, it's okay to cheat. And the other one is saying, buddy, honesty is your first. And you got to learn to manage that board of directors. That is really the key in life, is learning to manage yourself and making a commitment to the things that matter to you, and being open and honest about your values and what you're trying to do in your life. So that's it. Yeah, you're right. The most important, the most difficult person you'll ever manage in your whole life is you.
It's so well said. Thank you. How about as far as from what we've been hearing, I think personal growth is really important to you.
Absolutely.
And so what would be some of the things that you've done? Maybe you have a couple books to recommend, or other than your great book, or programs or people that you've really admired and learned from that you could share with our audience.
Well, I've had a number of mentors in all shapes and sizes, from younger. My grandchildren have been mentors to me, particularly about recycling and things like that. They're always reminding me, Grandpa, you didn't put that in the right container. So they're mentors. I've had mentors that have reported to me that have taught me new skills or new things about life or about business or whatever. And I've had people that are more senior to me, more experienced than me, have been mentors. So they've all been important in my life, and they've all taught me things. And then I was a voracious reader, particularly about leadership, about self-improvement and growing myself. And, so reading about other people's stories really helps, or observing other people's stories. You learn from the things that you don't want to do too. Sometimes I reported to somebody that I didn't want to be like that person. So I learned from that. And, you just have to be aware all the time and be curious, and drive yourself to get outside your comfort zone, because it's so easy to say, stay comfortable, and you're never going to grow or learn when you're always comfortable. You got to be a little bit uncomfortable to grow and learn. And so I was always trying to drive myself out of my comfort zone. And that was a great way of learning. But it's all those things that go together that make you up, that make you a whole person.
Yeah. And today I was watching one of your award ceremony where you got the Lifetime Achievement Award from Howard Schultz. And you talked about the story of Jim, who would come to the coffee shop every day, but one day he didn't come. And how the whole Starbucks culture, I could see that how the emotion plays such a big role in the Starbucks culture. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that story to resonate with our listeners, like how important it is for everybody, from the barista to the manager, everybody caring about customers, how important it is for a Starbucks.
Well, they're caring about each other first,
Mm-hmm.
and then caring about those human beings we call customers in a real way. And so the story is this. There was a man, he was in his late 70s, early 80s. He was in a nursing home across the street from one of our stores. Every day he would come in the afternoon and he'd order a blueberry muffin and a short drip coffee. And he would sit and talk to the baristas, and they would talk to him, and they would joke with him. He was a big Pittsburgh Steeler fan, and they might put, every day when he got this muffin, they might put on the bag or the cup, hey, some saying, hey, Jim, we love you. Or one time, maybe the Steelers suck, and to make him laugh. And so, that went on for a couple of years. And one day, as you said, Jim didn't show up. And so one of the baristas took the coffee and the scone across, or the muffin across the street to the nursing home, and walked in and talked to the receptionist. And the receptionist said, I'm sorry to tell you, but Jim passed away in his sleep last night. So he went back to the store, and everybody was sad, because he wasn't a customer. He was a friend, he was a friend. And so the next day, one of Jim's children came into the store and said, we're going to have a funeral tomorrow for Jim. Would it be possible if, the baristas and the store manager, if you could come to the funeral? And the store manager said, absolutely. We'll be there. We'll get somebody to replace us. And he did. And they show up at the funeral home. And here, as they walk through the front door, are 4 big tables. Those big tables that they have when you go out with 10 people at a dinner, when you go to some kind of event. And on those tables were every bag and every cup where they had written a message on it for Jim. And what it shows you is how important the little things we do in life for other human beings matter. Who would have ever thought Jim would have kept every one of those? But he did, because they were important to him. They made him feel like a human being that mattered. And so that's what it's about, is making everybody you meet along the way as if they matter. When you're walking down the street, don't just keep your head down. Say hi. When you get in an elevator in the morning, say good morning. When you're in the hallway of your office, say good morning. Acknowledge that people have value. When you're walking down the street and you see somebody with a cup out needing some money, you don't have to always put money in. You can say good morning to them and look them in the face. Treat people with respect, with dignity, and it makes a huge difference in life.
Yeah. I think you've really embodied the idea of both. And what I mean by that is, a lot of people think that it's people or profit, but you say it's both. A lot of people think that it's work or it's family. Yeah. You say both. What would you say to those people who feel that it's one or the other, who feel that, I'm either going to start a family or I'm going to focus on my career, so to speak? What would you remind them? How would you remind them that it can be both?
Yeah. When I say integration, and, everybody wants, like you talked about, balance. See, we're never in balance. We're always out of balance. If you think of I don't care, any famous skater that you've ever known, or hockey players, they're on this thin piece of metal. They're never in balance. They're always a little bit off. Skating that, right?
Right.
And that's the same way in life. It's always a hair out of balance, and that's why I like integration. And so, sometimes you're going to spend more time with your family than you are in your work. Sometimes you're going to spend more time at your work. The issue is not to feel guilty about it, but talk about it.
Right.
Work it out. And sometimes your kids are going to need you. And it means that you might have to miss a day of work. And I know it's difficult in some companies, but you want to find companies or build a company that cares about people first. And that if you got a family issue, they're saying, absolutely, go take care of it. But you just integrate them, and I always, as your kids get older, you can talk about anything with them. You can do anything. You can talk about your work. You can talk anything, and always be working it out with your significant other or your spouse, so that you both know where you are. Right. So it's not arguments over, well, you weren't home, but you remember, performance counts. If you commit to be home at 6:00 for dinner, then you damn well better be home, or call early enough to say, I can't be home at that time. and I'm sorry, but whatever.
Right.
So it's more that than anything. And there is no balance, and you can do both. I don't believe that. Look, it's hard to, if you're a CEO of a $25 billion corporation, and it takes a lot of time. But the guy that was running Disney, he said, when I got a call from my family, that came first. I don't care if I was in a meeting or not. Any leader can do that, right? And you might say, is it urgent, or can I call you back, or do we need to talk about it now? And and whatever the answer is, you respect that. And so you respect your kids, you respect your spouse, your significant other, and you respect your work, and they can go together. Look at my father had a small mom and pop grocery store. He got up every morning at 4:00 to go down to Produce Row to get the produce and the fruits and vegetables, to bring it back to the store, to clean them all up, to get ready to open the store at 8:00. Now, in those days, the store closed at 6:00. But by the time he got home, by the time he closed the store, swept the floor, and got home, it was 6:30. He sat down at the dinner table. He ate dinner faster than anybody I've ever known. Right? And he was up off there, and he would go sit in his chair, and before you know it, he was asleep.
Mm.
He worked hard, but I knew he loved me because he told me he loved me and he cared about me, right?
Right.
And every once in a while, he would take me to the zoo or whatever it was. I never questioned whether or not he loved me or he was giving me enough time. I understood how hard he was working.
Mm.
And so they go together.
True.
Thanks, Howard. Well, I know we're about to wrap up here. We're very grateful for your time. I have one last question, and then I don't know if Renuma or John, but my question, I'm curious, because obviously Howard Schultz, built this big brand of Starbucks that you were a big part of. Tell me one thing, or tell our listeners, that you really learned from Howard Schultz. What was the major thing that jumped out to you in working with Howard Schultz?
There are a couple things. Do you know what the word mensch means?
No.
Okay, mensch means that you're just a wonderful human being.
Mm.
You do anything for anybody else. When you say, it's a Yiddish word, part German, and it means that you, when somebody needs something, you're there. Period. Right? And so that's who he was. If you needed something, Howard Schultz would take care of you. He would do whatever it took.
Right.
To do it. And he was just that kind of person. Was he always soft and gentle? No, he was not. Let me tell you. But he was always a mensch. You knew you could always depend on him. And the other thing I learned from Howard was that, my mother always said, keep your head down, do your work, don't talk about it. Howard taught me that sometimes you have to talk about it.
Mm.
That you have to tell your story. And he was a great storyteller, and he told it everywhere he went. And I learned to tell that story too, the Starbucks story too. And it made a huge difference in the success of Starbucks. And so those are the two things that I learned from Howard.
Right. And I just want to thank you so much for all the wisdoms and insight that you have provided for us and the listeners. But at the end, I just want to know, how would you define success after all the experiences you went through? At this point of your life, what is success to you?
That 20 years from now, or whatever the time is, 10 years from now, I'm sitting in the nursing home in my rocking chair, and somebody comes up to me and says, Howard, you set out to nurture and inspire the human spirit, and you did it. That's success.
Beautiful.
And Howard, how I know you do speaking, and so what would be the best way for any of our listeners that they wanted to connect with you?
Well, I'll give, like I did before, I'll give them my cell phone number. It's 206-972-7776. That's 206-972-7776. And my email address is hb@howardbehar.com. I'm a little slow sometimes getting back, but I will get back.
Thank
This
you.
is, I just have to say that this is unbelievable that a person who was a former president of Starbucks and in such a and now a director also, you are so humble and you are so approachable. So many of the leaders going to that ivory tower seems to be so unapproachable. So they say that nobody can connect to me. How do you become that way? Like so approachable, and you have so much. You are doing so many things. So how do you get the time to do that?
Well, right now I'm retired, so I have a lot of time. But I always had, you're talking about open door. I would talk to anybody. And if somebody called me or sent, well, we didn't have emails my early career, but if they wanted to talk to me, they were going to get that opportunity because I just believe in it. I always wanted to be treated that way. So that's how I treat others, It's pretty much that way. And, I'm not always this humble, I have my ego too. And, but I just am Howard. That's all. I'm no better. I'm no worse than anybody else, and so I just try to live my life that way.
Right.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Howard, for joining us. And again, if you're listening, scroll down to those show notes if you want to see how to get in touch with Howard, how to learn more about him, and of course, the whole Starbucks story, which I think is absolutely fascinating. And you didn't mention your book, but I do want to just recommend it because it's phenomenal, and Coach can back me up on that. So thank you for writing such a wonderful and insightful book, and for your time today.
Well, thank you for having me. Thank you for plugging the book. I never see myself as a bookseller, but I'm glad I sell the books. I give all the money to charity that I earn on the book. So
Beautiful.
yeah.
That is
Thank you.
wonderful. Wow. And thank you for listening to the Limitless Leadership Lounge. Again, be sure to keep track of us on Facebook and leave us a review if you like. If you have any suggestions or feedback for us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Spreaker. So we'll be back next week for another tri-generational conversation for emerging leaders.